So would you like to go ahead and make some opening remarks? Thank you.
Okay. We'd like to thank the committee for accommodating us and our oral evidence in what we know has been a very busy schedule for everybody. I'm Marianne Buchanan-Stewart, Kirsty Montgomery and Theresa McFay, and we are part of the policy and engagement team for the Women's Rights Network. The Women's Rights Network Northern Ireland is a cross-community volunteer network of women living across Northern Ireland. Our members come from all sections of our community, all ages, sexual orientations, employment status, socio-economic and religious or non-religious backgrounds. We come from all political backgrounds, with members and supporters from Republican and Nationalist backgrounds, Unionist and Loyalist backgrounds, and a vast number who are now politically homeless. We are a part of the UK-wide Women's Rights Network. It's a non-partisan network across the UK with one priority, and that is to defend the sex-based rights of women through campaigning and advocating for single-sex spaces for women and girls. We aim to uphold and maintain the rights. We aim to hold and maintain the rights of women and girls in the UK and Ireland. We are all adult human females campaigning for evidence-based solutions to stop the erasure of our sex-based rights. The Women's Rights Network believes the rights, protection, safety and dignity of women and girls in Northern Ireland is not a political nor an ideological question, but a fundamental principle in a civilised society. We believe that the evidence provided in writing and now before this committee represents a majority viewpoint within Northern Ireland. This viewpoint has been greatly misrepresented and unrepresented by and before policymakers. The words man and woman are universally understood and unambiguous and must be reliable to classify biological reality. In recent times, the question, what is a woman, has become a gotcha moment for politicians and a debatable concept for the chattering classes, but it is not a concept for the ordinary person in the street. They know what a woman is. A woman is the class that has spent centuries being treated as the lesser sex. A woman is the class that had to fight for the right to vote. A woman is the class that is frequently paid less than their male counterparts. Women are also the class that are victim to the epidemic of male physical and sexual violence in Northern Ireland, the most dangerous place to live for women in Europe. In most areas of life, a person's sex is immaterial. But where it is important, it is really important. The sex of a person while walking through a supermarket or eating in a cafe is not relevant. However, when it comes to toilets, changing rooms, healthcare, sporting and job opportunities, it is sex that matters. Many women have been forced into silence on these issues in the workplace, in their family life and in public. They fear exclusion, threats, doxing and losing their jobs by challenging gender ideology. We run the risk of isolating 51% of our community by denying the need for women's sex-based rights. Women's silence is not compliance, and we ask today that you engage with sincerity on this matter. I will now pass to Kirsty to give a high-level overview of the briefing paper.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kirsty.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you to the committee for welcoming us today. Women and children represent our most vulnerable populations, and robust rights and protections are needed to ensure safety, dignity and equality of opportunity. While legislation cannot be wholly comprehensive, it must strive to be unambiguous and fit for purpose. The recent conflation of the words sex and gender, together with the introduction of the Gender Recognition Act, has allowed uncertainty to develop for service providers and employers. They can no longer rely on the common definitions of man and woman for legal purposes, so much so that the UK Supreme Court is currently considering this very question. The term gender is subjective. It refers to self-identity and relates to feelings. Legal definitions require objective clarity and to accurately identify those that need protection based on a particular characteristic. If sex cannot be defined, then it cannot be protected. Failure to accurately define that protected characteristic renders it meaningless. Sex is binary, immutable, and it cannot be changed. This committee has an opportunity to deliver robust and fit-for-purpose policy and legislation that will protect women and girls in their single-sex spaces, in employment, in sport, and in their most vulnerable moments. To deliver clarity for employers, service providers and public bodies, and support them to deliver on their duties and responsibilities. In recent times, we have seen this confusion and the toxic public conversation on these matters have a chilling effect on service providers, employers, and on each of us as individuals. Local leisure centres, employers, and supermarkets have adopted a self-ID approach which falls short of the current provisions in the Sex Discrimination Order, which already protects single-sex spaces. The Equality Commission has confirmed that for legal purposes there are only two sexes, and our members urge this committee to continue to protect those definitions in their review. Our network believes that this would be widely supported, as a recent YouGov poll shows that a clear majority of the UK population supports clarifying that sex means biological sex. Another area where biological sex is vital is in data collection and recording. Data must be recorded correctly to understand the specific issues that affect men and women. We must ensure that data is recorded correctly, especially in the areas of justice, health and employment. Accurate data collection is being undermined by the conflation of sex and gender. This conflation removes the clarity of data we need to understand the differences that men and women experience in life in the areas of employment, crime, physical and mental health. In Northern Ireland and more widely, we have seen violent and dangerous men being referred to by judiciary and in the media as women, with male violence, rape and murder being attributed and included as female crimes. These are not our crimes. As recently as December 2024, the PPS stated that they would respect the rights of the individual and refer to them within their stated gender. This cannot be allowed in the case of rape or sexual and violent crimes or domestic abuse. It is cruel and callous to expect the victim of a violent sexual crime to listen to their perpetrator being called a woman in court. The act of rape can only be committed by a man. The recent case here of a violent man who presents as a woman throws this issue into sharp focus. These challenges are not for women to accommodate or resolve. The PSNI and the Department of Justice must ensure that the records of crimes are based on their biological sex to ensure that crime statistics are accurate and representative. Within the last week, the UK Judicial Office of England and Wales has published new guidance to advise judges to stop referring to people using preferred pronouns in cases that hinge on the recognition of a person's biological sex. We urge the judiciary here to ensure that the same advice is issued with urgency. Males are being given access to female spaces without consultation or challenge, and the fact that women's spaces are being erased is not obvious to the woman in the street. She often has no idea that she could find a man in her Marks and Spencer's changing room. Check any news app any day of the week and you can read about examples of male non-contact sexual abuse, cameras being placed in school children's toilets, and even porn categories dedicated to the filming of unwitting women in changing rooms. Dangerous men do not carry a visible warning sign. They can't be identified on sight. So why would we allow any man into women's spaces regardless of how they identify? Denying the risk to women of allowing men in the places where they are their most vulnerable is naive at best, and the distressing impact of men in spaces where women should expect privacy and safety cannot be underestimated. Through lack of challenge to this self-ID approach, women have begun to self-exclude. Is it fair that those with religious or cultural beliefs that would be deeply offended by the presence of a man in a woman-only environment will self-exclude? Is it fair that a woman of any background should have to self-exclude? Are we imposing a urinary leash on women who have to stay close to home to keep themselves safe and avoid the distress that single-sex spaces should rightly protect them from? In the workplace, men and women are losing their jobs just for recognising that sex is a biological reality. Our members are aware of many cases of organisations bullying employees to include pronouns in their email bios, or actively avoiding their colleague who now presents as the opposite sex so they don't have to address that colleague in a manner that is not natural to them. Pronouns do not belong to the individual. They are for others to use. Therefore, demanding them is compelled speech and a breach of a person's basic human rights. The demand to use chosen pronouns implies the speaker holds the same belief in that ideology, and it is the first step to the confusion in which society currently finds itself. This committee has an opportunity to protect everyone's right to hold a belief that is worthy of respect in a democratic society, as described and ruled on in the Forstater case, that sex is real, sex is binary, and it cannot be changed. The language of women and girls has been eroded in front of our eyes. Dehumanising terms like birth givers, uterus havers, chest feeders, menstruators, and bonus holes, etc. are all titles given now to women. This degradation of women is not acceptable. Many find the removal of the language of women and girls offensive. The erasure of women's language is prevalent in all areas of life, and it is the language that we use every day to identify the very real experiences we go through. Just a few days ago, Wes Streeting, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, stated, "How is it that in the name of inclusion, the word woman has now been erased from NHS documents?" WRN hopes that sanity in this regard will return, and the UK Government will act to ensure the language of women is reinstated within our health service. In the area of employment, we know that women are historically underpaid and to this day are not paid equally to men. While we have fair pay legislation here, where men and women must be paid equally for the same job, it is not fit for purpose. Many companies are taking advantage of traditionally lower paid women and are not required to publish pay scales. To sidestep the law, companies are asking for women's current pay, where women often present with a lower pay, then make a slight incremental increase on their salary offer, leading to vast discrepancies within staff salaries, especially when it comes to their male comparators. Without pay transparency, companies will continue to disadvantage women and all those on lower salaries. Women are unable to identify out of those lower salaries that the patriarchy has forced upon us, and we rely on policy and legislation to ensure companies act fairly for women. The issue of representation of women in public and political life is important and is highlighted in the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. 4 Women Scotland are currently taking the Scottish Government to the Supreme Court to challenge the statutory guidance issued by them under the Gender Representation on Public Boards Scotland Act 2018. We urge the new Commissioner for Public Appointments, when appointed, to ensure that the representation of women is fair and that the government here protects women's rights to be represented in public life fairly, and that the EU Women on Boards Directive is progressed here.
Just checking, it's really meant to be opening remarks. How much more have you got left?
Very little.
Okay, go ahead.
As this remit falls to the Executive Office, we urge the Committee to ensure that everything is done to protect women in this regard. Thank you for considering the report, and I will pass back to Marianne for closing remarks.
Again, we thank you for listening. Gaps in equality legislation must be considered through the lens of ensuring the protections of all members of society and of those protected characteristics we rely on. We must ensure that we aren't creating a gap in equality legislation by allowing sex and gender to be conflated. We hope that today you can see that we approach this with a genuine concern for the rights, safeguards and dignity of women and girls, and are willing to engage constructively with all of you as you progress and with anything else that you may feel is relevant. And we're happy to take questions now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. I really appreciate that. And thank you, very comprehensive submission. So you talked about vulnerable women and girls, but would you agree with me that trans women are very vulnerable and will be subject to harassment and bullying?
In what environment?
Well, walking in the street, in employment, going about their daily basis, daily.
They are men, and if they want to dress and appear not to be men, everybody gets bullied for something that they wear, or some way they behave. It's not right. They shouldn't be bullied. But we're here to talk about women's rights, not men's rights. So we prefer the questions to be...
But if they've had surgery and they've got their recognition certificate, you know...
They're still men.
Okay. Well, I'll not pursue that. So you've talked about sort of the chilling impact and the demand for employees to use pronouns in their social media profiles, etc. So are there any particular examples of companies that have been forcing their staff to do that?
We wouldn't want to out our members or the companies that they work for, but it is an issue. Teresa has some...
Happen here?
Teresa has some...
Okay, go ahead.
Well, the most obvious cases are cases that have gone through the courts. There are cases going through a case in Northern Ireland going through the court at the moment, but I don't know. I can't tell you the details, and anyway, I wouldn't want to, since it's in front of the courts. The most famous cases is the Forstater case back 2 years ago, and it went to the Employment Appeal Tribunal to establish that employees had the right to hold gender-critical beliefs. We find it reprehensible that it's necessary for women to do this. It's a hugely expensive exercise to take an action through the courts, to go to appeal court, possibly to a higher court, costing tens of thousands of pounds. Because the law is not clear, and that's why we are looking for clarity in the law that the protected characteristic is sex. Sex refers to biological sex. There are two sexes, male and female, and you can't change your sex.
Okay. Just one more then, and it's in relation to the sort of crime statistics. To what degree do you feel that there is underrepresentation in terms of how the PSNI, PPS, etc. records crimes? Because as a woman, any women in the room, I'm more afraid of a man who presents as a man than a trans woman. So I'm just wondering, to what degree have you got evidence that there is a proportion of crimes that are actually carried out by trans women?
We can get those to you after this is over. But go ahead,
I'm
Teresa.
happy to try and answer or address the issue that you've put, Chair. Thank you. I mean, I totally agree that, for instance, the crime of rape is massively underreported, and those that are reported, the successful convictions is minuscule, and it is a scandal across the UK, undoubtedly. With regards to whether or not women are afraid of men generally or are afraid of...
The question I was asking was more around what percentage do you feel that crimes, whether they are sexually motivated or not, are actually carried out by trans women?
There are statistics, government statistics, and trans women offend at the same rate as every other man in the country.
Okay.
There's no difference.
Yeah.
In fact, it might actually, where sexual crimes are concerned, it's actually slightly higher.
Okay.
Yes, amongst the prison population, amongst the male prison population, the percentage of trans-identifying men in prison who have been convicted of sexual and violent crimes is much, much higher than the general male population in prison.
So you're saying that the statistics are there?
Yeah, we'll get those
yes,
to you.
indeed, and we're happy to send them to you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Deputy Chair.
Thank you. I'm interested in the area that you discussed in respect of equality in pay. For women, we've had an Equal Pay Act in Northern Ireland since 1970, and there have been some really landmark decisions in respect of that. So where do you see equal pay legislation needing to go? Because this is a review of equality legislation. So where do you see equality legislation with regards to the gender pay gap being improved or a need for change?
I think it's not going to be evident where the discrepancies lie or where the huge discrepancies lie in pay until companies are in Northern Ireland forced to publish their pay scales. As far as I'm aware, that legislation isn't in place here yet. I think in GB it is. They do have to publish their pay scales.
What difference would publishing a pay scale make? I mean, surely if you believe you're being paid less than someone else, you can bring up an equal pay claim.
You can.
And are very successful.
And many of them are, but you have to know that you're being underpaid before you can bring that. And I think traditionally in Northern Ireland, people don't discuss their salaries openly in the workplace. So women can be quite often paid a lot less than their male comparators and not know it. So until you understand the pay scale and where your job fits within that pay scale, you can't possibly know that you're being paid less than...
You can exclude the public sector from that because everybody knows that everybody gets in the public
Yeah.
sector. And in terms of that element of discrimination, that's a well-tested route, and there have been some incredibly good cases, particularly with local employment employees, people who are dinner women against bin men, and all of that has happened in the past. But in terms of private sector employment in Northern Ireland, surely the Equality Commission have a duty to assist anyone in terms of making those inquiries?
Yes, they do, and
Yeah.
they would. However, I would still go back to the point that if you don't know you're being paid less than the guy next to you, how could you possibly even raise a claim because you don't know?
So a positive from your perspective in respect of a review of equality legislation would be that private sector employers would be required by law to publish their pay rates. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Timothy, please. Oh, sorry, Brian. Brian.
Okay, thank you ladies for coming in today for your paper and quite frankly for taking a stand on this issue. I share your concerns about the erosion of women's rights, and I think there is a pushback across society at a change which has happened in a small number of years, where what was seen as biological fact and common sense, that it's becoming unacceptable in some circles to talk about men and women. I remember being told you shouldn't say good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and you shouldn't say good morning, boys and girls, and I certainly didn't listen to that advice. And equally I understand that we must have tolerance across society for how people wish to live their lives, but that doesn't mean we try to rewrite the basics of the human species. I think it's very helpful that you've spoken up for this issue and spoken up for many people. But I do want to push you. There are people who are transgender, and that's how they wish to live their lives. That's how they wish to define themselves, and there must be tolerance of people in their private lives. That does not mean we have to do away with either single-sex spaces or protections for women in particular. Have you had engagement with either individuals or groups representing trans people, and do you have any suggestions for how there can be tolerance of people who define themselves that way in terms of how society is structured without having to abandon the whole idea of sex and single-sex spaces?
We have personally and individually had discussions with trans people. Some trans people actually agree with us, some disagree. But as we said, there's lots of things. It doesn't matter whether you're trans. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. Everyone should be protected with regards to housing, employment, and equal rights all around. But we shouldn't have to share our female spaces with a male. And as no one can change sex, when a man says he's a woman, he's still a man. We have our right to our privacy and our dignity, and we need to retain that. Everything else we have no issue with.
I would also add that if there is an issue with men who choose to present as women using men's spaces, then maybe that's an education point for men rather than for women to be tolerant of those differences, because if these men were able to use their own facilities based on their biology without fear from other men, then they wouldn't need to use women's spaces.
And one other question, Chair. We had the Christian Institute in before, and many churches have youth organisations that are, for boys and for girls. Not all, but I remember when lottery funding came in, one of the criteria is that you couldn't have single-sex groups at one stage, in applying. So it does seem again that there's at various stages there's an intolerance of having single-sex groups, and I think there's a case recently in Australia of a biological man who sued a women's group successfully because they said he couldn't be a member.
Lesbians in Australia now cannot gather without a man present. That is the law in Australia.
Yeah.
If a man demands to be present at a lesbian meeting, he can be present. Lesbians do no longer have single-sex protected spaces.
Well, this is an example where the unintended consequences of not thinking something through and not respecting the rights for single-sex spaces. Are you aware of any cases in Northern Ireland that you'd want to highlight where this has become a difficult issue?
Well, there's a couple of court cases. I'm involved in one myself at the minute, but again, we can't really discuss them because they're not there yet. But anecdotally, we have lesbians in our group who have been told that they must. This is in some of our Northern Ireland groups that are specifically for lesbians, that they should be accepting men into their spaces, and that we know that a few youth groups that have taken girls away, and a boy has identified as a girl and has been sharing their sleeping quarters. Now, if I was the parent of any of those girls, I would not be happy about a boy sharing sleeping accommodation with my girl on a weekend away.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Timothy.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming along today. It's refreshing that you have come in. It's refreshing the document you have provided us with. Very forthright, very proud of the stance that you take, and very much, from the get-go, we define women as adult human females. It's refreshing to hear that in this committee. There's a number of times where I've either asked a minister or some of the officials to define a woman, and they must still be looking for that definition. So they do. So it's very refreshing, and thank you very much for coming and putting yourself out of the comfort zone to come here today. So reading down through some of your submissions, taking this out. So Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998 states that there must be due regard to the need to promote equality of opportunity between men and women generally, which refers to biological sex. Would you believe that you're the first group that's come that has pointed that out, as that's within law, and this is the last day of gaps in equality legislation? And certainly a note earlier on in the week that Equality Commission now only recognises two genders, and it's good to hear that that's where
we prefer. I'm not being pernickety here, but sex.
Yes.
Gender is now a confusing term where people don't really understand that it's how you present yourself rather than your actual sex.
Mm-hmm. That leads me on to the next point. So your group would be very keen that in law is defined as sex.
Yes.
There's no mention to gender because it's confusion, whereas
yes.
sex is biological sex from birth.
Yes.
You are very forthright in that. One of your recommendations, any single piece of equality legislation should clearly define women and girls or retain biological sex as a protected characteristic. I suppose I want to come on to this document, and this is one of the flagships of the executive, ending violence against women and girls. Were you ever consulted, or were you ever asked to take part in the consultation of that? Because one of the one of the queries I had from the co-design partners, when I can't remember if it was the ministers here or the officials, was asking them, was there any gender critics that were asked to get involved? Is this your first time coming to give evidence?
Yes.
And for me, that's a breakthrough moment now that you have come, and certainly when it comes to documents like this in future, that Women's Rights Network would be one of the ones that would be for...
Sometimes hard enough to get your local councillor or MLA to speak to you, never mind anybody else beyond that.
So, to be charitable to those that hold a different view, why does gender or sex, why does that, create such a hostile environment? I know in this committee in the past, when I've raised it, there is only two sexes. It's faced quite a bit of criticism. Why are there those in public life that are hostile to that?
I find because once you scrape the surface, there is no actual factor or reality to it. It's pretty much it's somebody's wish to be, but it's not their reality, and it's not our reality. I mean, I have no objection to somebody defining themselves and any, they could define themselves as a horse and I wouldn't care. But I'm not going to feed them hay and put a saddle on them and ride them around a field. And the same, if a man tells me he's a woman, I'm happy enough I don't object to him having the same rights as everyone else, his housing, his employment rights. He shouldn't be sacked because he's transgender. He shouldn't lose his house because he's transgender. He shouldn't lose anything because he's transgender. But he shouldn't be compelling me to use the words to define him that are not factual and that go against what I see in front of me.
And going on to the chair's point, and just bringing out them facts, male violence against women and girls and data recording. Recent figures published in the UK show that more than 70% of men who identify as women in British prisons have been convicted of violent sexual crimes, and research has shown that males who identify as women are 18 times more likely to be convicted of a violent offence than female comparators. Time and time again we have been told that a man pretending to be a woman poses no risk to society, poses no risk to other women. Obviously the stats don't support that claim, and very much your group is of the opinion.
Yeah, and going back to your previous question, this ties in with this. When we're told, when a man presents to us as a woman and demands that we call him a woman and demands that we treat him as a woman, we're naturally honed to seek out who's male and who's female surrounding us. It's a leftover from our evolution. But when you see the statistics on male violence against women and girls, you can see why we need to know who in our surroundings is male or female. And when you squash that instinct in women, you're taking away a defence mechanism. You're telling them, you must call this man a woman. So the next man you see, then that man might not have been dangerous, but the next man you see, you have to treat as a woman. You're squashing that instinct to get away from maybe a situation that you would normally not place yourself in because it was a man there rather than another woman. So, linking that back to your statistics, the statistics show they are actually more inclined to be sexually violent. So therefore, we are quashing a legitimate fear. We're being asked to quash a legitimate fear within us.
Page 7. So under UK law, females cannot commit the act of rape. Moving on, very important to highlight that. Page 8, the Northern Ireland Prison Service Rules X91 state, women prisoners shall be held in separate accommodation. Does our Minister of Justice know that? Because the last time she was in front of the House, it was always, this is a case-by-case basis. So are you telling me that's in law? That's in page 8?
It's actually, I think, in the Geneva Convention that women shall not be housed with men. If women in a war can be housed and separately from men, I don't know. I can't understand how we in peacetime cannot manage to do that.
So on that basis, what's your thoughts on this case-by-case basis then for trans women in female prisons?
I think it needs to be addressed in the law, in the legislation. So it's good that this committee is looking at it. We welcome that.
Yep. Regarding Ards and North Down Council, what would your thoughts be and your advice to them? Obviously, they have hit the media, and rightly so, after issuing guidance to 3 of its leisure centres, which welcomes transgender people to use whichever toilet and changing facility they identify with. So no recognition card is required or will be requested. In reality, this removes male and female toilet and changing facilities and creates 2 mixed-sex changing facilities. It is naively or willful ignorance to believe that this could not result in abuse and is a risk to women and girls using those facilities, many of whom may not be aware of the admittance guidance. So that's the Northern Ireland Council has taken that decision. That's certainly something very, very concerning for myself. So what would your message to them be today?
Again, mixed sex spaces increase the risk of sexual violence towards women, whether that be upskirting. And I mean, you can say you're in a locked cubicle, but if the rest of the changing rooms empty and you're alone in a cubicle and you go to leave it and some man pushes his way in, I mean, you've no escape, you know. And you know you can't not stop maybe a man coming into an empty changing room anyway. But we have those spaces so that those men who do try to enter those spaces stand out and can be approached and stopped. If it's all mixed sex spaces, it increases the risks to women. And I think if we're going to discuss male violence against women and girls, we have to take that into consideration. And the statistics are there that mixed sex spaces where women are vulnerable are more dangerous for women.
And just
can I add something?
Yeah.
I suppose that's why we particularly have included our wish for that the Assembly and the Executive would make provision to inform service providers, not just private commercial organisations, but also government departments, that there's no such thing as self-ID in Northern Ireland, that the way several organisations, public sector and private sector, have gone ahead, implemented self-ID into what was previously female spaces without any consultation, it's just completely inappropriate.
Yep, and just to finish off my last question, so going back to the ending violence against women and girls document, obviously something very serious and a problem in Northern Ireland. Do you believe for something like this to be successful, the executive needs to work out and define what a woman is to be able to enforce their policy and have this a success?
Yes.
Yes, that's our biggest ask, is that where any legislation is being drafted, it refers to male and female, man and woman, based on a biological reality and not an acquired gender or a self-ID approach.
Thank you very much. Thank
Okay.
you, Chair.
Thank you. Carol, please.
So I agree on your submission on EU Pay Transparency Directive. I think it's really important to keep bringing that up. I completely disagree with everything you say. We've had no gay supply beforehand and now it's no trans supply. I mean, I think it's disgraceful, to be frank.
We're not saying there's no trans supply. We're saying trans people should have all the rights, the human rights that everybody else has.
And then outline areas where trans people should not have access.
No, trans people, women who are trans identified can still access female spaces. So we're not excluding trans people. We're excluding men from our single sex spaces.
Do you feel that there's no such thing as a trans man or trans woman?
Sorry.
A trans
define.
A trans woman is a man who presents and pretends to be a woman. A trans man is a woman who pretends and presents as a man.
Okay.
So trans men who are women biologically are not excluded from
Trans women are.
because they're men.
They're not excluded from their own spaces, from men's spaces.
They're just
They're not
excluded
excluded from women, from those places where they legitimately can go. They're just, we would ask them to be excluded from women's spaces.
And I just find, the whole history of LGBTQ plus is about inclusion rather than exclusion, and that's my big problem. So, I'll say no more.
Sure, just one word that's been used regularly throughout all of this is the word pretend. The government provides gender recognition certificates. That doesn't say that your gender has changed. The law says your sex has changed. Now, you've highlighted heavily today, this is about sex, male and female. The law says that.
The Gender Recognition Act was created because homosexuals could not marry. So 2 women couldn't marry and 2 men couldn't marry. So the way around that was to create a Gender Recognition Act where a man could change his gender and a legal sex, it's a legal fiction, so that he could marry another man. Now that we have same-sex, you can look it up, you can roll your eyes, but you can look it up.
I'm not rolling my eyes, I'm just incredulous. Sorry.
Yeah, it is incredulous that was made law before same-sex marriage was made law. And now we have same-sex marriage. There's no need for a Gender Recognition Act.
Men could not marry men before the law changed. Likewise, women couldn't marry women before
But they
the law
could
changed.
when they had a gender recognition certificate because, as you say, legally their sex changed.
Yes, but that was not the purpose of having gender
Can
recognition
I add to
certificates.
that?
Conscious I still have to bring Sinead in, but go ahead. No, go ahead. Make your point quickly. Thank you.
With regard to the Gender Recognition Act and the associated gender recognition certificates, it's important to bear in mind very few trans people have a gender recognition certificate because the subsequent legislation has given them many proper rights. So the gender recognition certificate really is irrelevant. It's not
approximately 5,000 in the United Kingdom. I think just sorry, Sharon, for just to conclude, Jess. I think I find the word, and it's not me, I do, and I believe that many trans people will be traumatised by listening to this today, and they will be offended and traumatised by the use of the word pretend.
Okay, thank you. Sinead, please.
Stuart.
Thank you very much for coming, first of all, before the panel. This is an extremely sensitive and complex issue, and we need to be really mindful of our language and the impact that it has on very vulnerable people in our communities. Not everyone fits neatly into male or female. It is extremely complex, and there are a lot of issues regarding gender identity, and we have to be very sensitive towards it. I do not agree with the presentation that you have made today, and I just want to put that on record.
All of it, or just some of it?
Well, some of the language that you've used, and I think Stuart has said that, the word pretend. I know a lot of not a lot of transgender, because there's not a lot of transgender people, but I know some transgender individuals, and they're very vulnerable, and they feel that they are under attack by communities. This identity kind of war that is going on globally, not just here, globally, is very scary for individuals, and I think we need to be very sensitive of that in our discussions regarding equality. And I want to say that. Now, I want to get back to your briefing just to get a bit of clarity. In your briefing, you say that in Ireland there has been effectively declared a mixed-sex environment for all women and girls. Can you tell us how this declaration has interacted with their equality legislation and what has been the impact of that? And then if I could bring you back to the 70% that we talked about transgender prisoners and that, can you give me the figures, the number of transgender prisoners that is actually referring to? Because percentages sometimes can...
Yeah, we can get the government figures for you and send them to you after this.
I don't understand the first part of the question.
Do you get that one?
No, I'm just going to write it down.
It's on page 43 of your briefing. You talk about Ireland has effectively declared a mixed sex environment for all women and girls in Ireland. You know, you're critically saying that.
Where are you getting that from?
Page 43 of your...
Page 15.
Page 15,
Page
sorry,
15,
page 43 in our...
Page 15 of the briefing.
And so I just want to say, you know, can you tell us how this declaration has interacted with their equality legislation and what has been the impact on that? You know, because you've referred to it quite extensively there in your last paragraph.
just making a note for
Okay.
what information we need to provide to the committee.
There were two parts to your question, sorry.
Yes, there's no requirement in Ireland other than fill in an A4 page to declare that you're the opposite sex. That's where it starts. So that means that I can walk into a toilet and I can see Timothy standing there in his suit and his tie and his beard and know clearly that he's a man, and I can't challenge him in the Republic of Ireland because he can say I have a GRC. He can it's self-identification. They just fill out an A4 sheet and that's it.
And that's what I'm saying. Can you tell us how that declaration has impacted the equality legislation as provided within the Republic of Ireland?
We'll get that information to you afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. And then the other, in relation to violence against women and girls, have you actually engaged with Nexus, with Victim Support NI or Women's Aid in relation to violence against women and girls?
We reach out to women's organisations in Northern Ireland all the time and no one responds.
None of them?
None of them?
Political parties don't respond either.
Okay, thank you. I suppose that one of the areas that we will look at is the Executive Office with a responsibility for that strategic framework of ending violence against women and girls. Obviously went out to consultation a few years ago and there was a delay, etc., in actually getting it launched. So I'm not sure how long your organisation has been in existence. It's like longer, it was maybe
2021?
2021, yeah.
Okay, so maybe some of the consultations started before that, but we can certainly pass your contact details.
Although that's come up quite a lot, particularly with grassroots women's groups, that they feel that they weren't consulted as part of this strategy. So
No, I'm just
Yeah.
offering something from today's meeting, for example, just to ensure. But no, I totally agree. I think that there was quite a
missed
lot.
opportunities,
Yeah.
just.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
It
you.
was
Thank you.
a tense session, but I really appreciate your contribution and the effort you went into to pull together that submission. It was very, very comprehensive. So thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you all for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members. So that was a
I'd
suggestion.
wait for you to move. and then
Okay.
I'll move.
That was a suggestion there. Is there anything else out of this session that we need to be following up on? No. Okay, members. Thank you again, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay. So, I'm just looking at my here. So.